All right, so we're going to make a start. Um, we've got a few people still coming in, but we're really excited to present to you tonight a webinar for all runners. So we're very much of the mindset that if you run, even if it's only a couple of times a week, you're definitely a runner. And hopefully this information will be super relevant to all of you, whether you're starting out as a new runner to the sport or you've been running for a long time, and perhaps you've got some injuries and issues that you want to get on top of, or you're struggling with understanding the nutrition to help you perform at your best. Hopefully there'll be something for everyone in there to be able to take away and have some really, really great experiences and help you better enjoy your running. So tonight we're going to hear from Julia Angelico. Julia is an accredited practicing dietitian and nutritionist with a master's in dietetics. She's completed further qualifications with the Sports Dietitian Australia to become a sports dietitian, so specifically with a sports focus. She's worked with a wide range of athletes and is a runner herself, so has a special interest in running nutrition. So tonight she'll be sharing some practical tips to help you perform at your best. Sean has got a Bachelor in Physiotherapy, Masters in Sports and Exercise Medicine, and has worked across multiple sporting organisations, including the Irish Football Association, Charlton Athletic Football Club, and England Athletics, and has worked with athletes competing at both the World Championships level and the Paralympic. Is currently working with the AFL in their State League talent pathways, in addition to Melbourne Sports Physio, and has a keen interest in the diagnosis and rehabilitation of running-related injuries. I'm Andrew. I'm a Senior Podiatrist and Director of Melbourne Podiatry Clinic. I have a real passion and interest in running. I love running myself. I do a lot of ultra-marathon running and marathon running, and work with a lot of runners from assessing their running gait to treating sort of lower limb injuries. So hopefully between the three of us, we'll be able to help provide some good insights into helping you perform at your best. Tonight, we've got some prizes on offer. So we've got a $100 voucher from our friends at the Running Company in Yarraville, some pairs of Steigen socks. We've got 3 valid strength assessments to help work out how strong you are and where perhaps you can do some work to improve. 3 times a 50% off a dietitian initial appointment and meal plan. And the way to be eligible for this is we're going to have a code word. And hopefully by the end of this code word is going to help, something that we're going to be working to help you improve. We're going to have the letter of that code word hidden throughout the presentation. So just remember the code word. Once we have the last letter, I'll let you know when that is, just the first to type in that code word, we'll be in touch to give you your prize. So keep an eye out throughout the presentation for that code word. Here's the first one. Here's the first letter. So make sure you write that one down. All right, so I don't want to take up any more of your precious time on a Thursday night. I'm going to hand over to Julia, who's going to get stuck into helping you better understand how to perform at your best from a running nutrition point of view.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. I'll be taking you through the first section, all about fueling for performance. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at what it looks like to be fueled or underfueled. So it's helpful if you think of your body like a car. If you're not giving it enough fuel, you can't expect it to run or perform at its best. And there will be usually a few common signs that you might be underfueling. And they might be that you're getting injured frequently, you feel fatigued, not recovering well, you're not improving in your runs, and so on. On the other hand, when you're well fueled, you're more likely to reduce your risk of injury, recover efficiently after each session, train consistently, hit PBs, and so on. So fueling your body gives you the best chance of becoming the strongest runner you can be. And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll pick up some tips and tricks to help you do that. Okay, so how do we make sure that you have enough fuel in the tank, or how do you become fueled? So the first step is to make sure that you're eating enough energy overall. And we can measure energy in calories or kilojoules. And going back to our car theory, we can think of calories as our petrol. And like each car requires a different amount of petrol, it's the same with us as runners. We all require a different amount of calories to optimize our performance. And that can be dependent on things like age, how many days you train, the intensity at which you train, what phase you're in. So if you're preparing for an event or race and you're putting in those extra kilometers, you're going to need more fuel than usual. So that's the first step, is to make sure you're actually eating enough. Next is where those calories or that fuel comes from. So I'm sure many of you have heard of macronutrients, those being carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail in just a bit. And the last thing we consider to be optimally fueled is timing. So with that, I'm referring to fueling around your runs, so before, during, and after, and what the best things to do at those times are, which we'll also go into shortly as well. Okay, macronutrients or macros. So it's important to find the right balance of macros as a runner. They all play an important role, and we want to include sources of each of them in our diet. So like our calorie target, macronutrient targets are also individual, but I can confidently say that carbohydrates are important for all runners and should make up a large portion of your calorie intake. So think of carbohydrates as the premium fuel for your body and your hypothetical car. When we eat them, our body breaks them down into glucose, and that glucose is used immediately for energy if we need it, or it's stored as glycogen in our muscles for later use. So if you're not eating enough carbohydrates, your muscle glycogen stores will be low and you won't have that fuel in the tank. As a result, you'll likely fatigue earlier and not be able to train with the intensity that you're wanting. So overall, carbs are very, very important for runners. Next, we have protein. So protein is also key because it helps our muscles recover and get stronger. So having stronger muscles reduces the risk of injury, and also stronger equals faster, which is what we're all aiming for. So plus, if you're doing strength training, which is something I'm sure Sean will recommend and cover soon, protein is key in supporting those adaptations as well. And lastly, we have fats. So fats are essential for our health, but they are also the most energy-dense macronutrient. And what I mean by that is they provide more calories per gram than protein or carbohydrates. And as runners burning a bit of energy, it's not always easy to eat enough or replace what we've burnt. So having foods like avocado and olive oil can help you meet your energy needs more efficiently. And there's just a few different sources of all those foods in this little Venn diagram here. Okay, going into carbohydrates in a bit more detail, we've got two main types, complex and simple. So complex carbohydrates are foods like whole grains, oats, quinoa, and potatoes. They are quite high in fiber, and foods higher in fiber take our body longer to digest, and they provide a steady release of energy, which is a good thing. It means we have consistent energy levels throughout the day, as well as other benefits. But since they take longer to digest, they're often not the first choice right before we run. So that's where simple carbohydrates come in. So think things like white bread, crumpets, juice, lollies, etc. Because they are lower in fiber, they are easier to digest, and they provide our muscles with energy quickly. So if you think right before you run, what's going to give me rapid energy, that will be those simple carbohydrates. So I just want to highlight here that they both have a role and they're both important, just at different times. Okay, so now we'll get into the fun stuff of what to eat before you run. Before I go on, if anyone's got a go-to meal or snack that you ritually have before you run, you can just pop it in the chat box below, and we'll go through them later, and maybe you can give someone else an idea of what to have before they run. But I've just put together a little bit of a timeline on what foods to choose depending on how long you have before your run. So the main goal of following this timeline is to, number one, reduce any risk of tummy upset. Sorry, I think I just went back one sec. Okay, here we go. So number one is to reduce any risk of tummy upset, and number two is to ensure that the fuel reaches your muscles at the right time. So we can break that down into 3 timeframes. Number 1 is 2 to 3 hours before you run. Number 2 is 30 to 60 minutes before you run. And number 3 is less than 30 minutes before you run. So you don't have to eat at all of these 3 timeframes. For example, you might opt for a main meal 2 to 3 hours before you run, and then you might follow that up with a little top up of simple carbs before you start. So I'll go over different training schedules and what that might look like as well. But just remember that everyone is different with what they like to do, and it does take time and practice to figure out what works best for you and your body. Okay, so 2 to 3 hours before. At this stage, we want to think of a more balanced meal. So you still want it to be rich in carbs, but at this time you can include some complex carbs, a bit of protein and fat, since you've got plenty of time for digestion before you head out for your run. So typical breakfast, lunch, or dinner meals work well here, as you can see on this slide, like sandwiches, wraps, poke bowls, oats, pasta, and things of that sort of variety. If you have 30 to 60 minutes before you run, we're going to start to limit the protein, fat, and fiber content. Because you're heading off for your run soon, you want that fuel to be digested soon as well. So you're looking for more simple carbs. Some good options include things like raisin toast, cereal with skim milk, crumpets and honey, and hot cross buns, which are perfect to take advantage of during this season. And lastly, less than 30 minutes before you head off, we want to keep it super simple here. So these are foods that will give you an almost immediate energy boost right before you head out. So things like lollies, gels, dried fruit like sultanas and mango. And if you're new to eating before a run and a bit nervous about how it might make you feel, I do recommend starting small, like a glass of fruit juice or a date, and gradually work your way up from there. But for majority of the people, once you start having something like this before you go, you will definitely notice the difference, and you probably won't go back to going into any run fasted. So that's fueling before you run in a nutshell. And now we're just going to move on to what to do during your run. Okay, so during your run, there are some general guidelines on the amount of carbs to take on per hour, depending on the length of your run. So for runs lasting less than roughly an hour, we would expect that your glycogen stores are topped up from all the carbs that you've been having before, and you should be well fueled for that run without anything extra. But by all means, if you want to take on some fuel, something like a few sips of Gatorade or a few lollies would work well there. And if you're running for longer than an hour to an hour and a half, we will have started to burn through those glycogen stores, and this is where we want to start taking on fuel. So obviously, by doing so, we're going to be able to maintain higher intensities, delay fatigue, and improve your performance. But like anything with nutrition, the ideal amount will be different for each person. So whether you're a beginner or advanced, what your running pace is, and also what your gut tolerance is to food and fluid during exercise will impact how much you take on per hour. So for beginners, we will tend to start at the lower end, around 30 grams of carbs per hour, and then gradually increase the amount as your gut gets more used to it. And we call this training the gut. So just like you train your body to run longer distances, you can also train your digestive system to better tolerate and process that food and fluid while you're exercising, which is pretty cool. Okay, so 1 to 2 hours, if that's how long you're running for, we generally recommend 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour. And a good rule of thumb is to take on fuel every 25 to 30 minutes so you can hit those hourly requirements. So here are some examples of products that you might use. There are so many different ones on the market that you can experiment with to find what works best for you. Some are quite sweet, some have different textures like the Morton gels. Everyone has different preferences. So if anyone has a favorite gel or product that they use, feel free to drop it in the chat box and tell us why you really enjoy it. Okay, so for runs lasting more than 2 to 2.5 hours, taking in more than 60 grams of carbs per hour can be beneficial, especially for advanced or like highly trained runners. So the more carbs you take in, the higher the intensity you can sustain over a longer period of time. However, there are limits to how much our gut can absorb from a single carb source, such as glucose and fructose, which are two types of carb sources that we use. So without going too technical, our glucose transporter becomes saturated at 60 grams of carbs per hour and fructose at 30 grams of carbs per hour. So going beyond those amounts can lead to those carbs being unabsorbed and may cause some gut discomfort. But if we combine glucose and fructose, you can increase absorption rates to up to 90 grams per hour. And luckily, there are products formulated exactly for that you can see here. And there are lots of different options as well to explore. These are just a few. So now that you know how to nail your carb intake during your run, we can move on to what to do afterwards. Okay, so after your run, the 4 R's of recovery are really important to remember. So number 1 is to refuel with carbohydrates. So you've just burned through a significant amount of glycogen. So it's important to refuel those stores to prepare you for your next run. And if you're doing a back-to-back session, so for example, you're going straight from run to gym or something like that, you would opt for more simple carbs between those sessions to help you replenish quickly. Otherwise, if you have a bit of time before your next session, you would choose more complex carbs. Next, we want to repair with protein. So repairing any damage that we've done to our muscles so that you can get stronger and help prevent injury. So think of any kind of like lean meat, like chicken, steak, fish, high protein dairy products, tofu if you're vegetarian, and so on. Next, we want to revitalize with color. So by this, I mean getting your fruit and veg in. They're packed with vitamins and antioxidants that reduce inflammation and support your overall recovery. So make sure to add some color to your post-run meal or snack as well. And lastly, you want to rehydrate with fluids. So things like water, milk, sports drink, whatever kind of fluid is your preference to replace what we've lost during exercise. And we also want to replace electrolytes. So sodium is the main electrolyte that is lost through sweat. And by having some salty foods or a balanced meal after your run, in most cases, that's very efficient in replacing those losses. So we want to follow all of these steps. You can think of it like a bit of a checklist, and you want to do this within 2 hours of finishing your run to kickstart your recovery. If you're someone who doesn't often feel hungry after a run, can you click that little hands up emoji? I'm not sure if I'll be able to see them, but like that little raise your hand.
Yeah, we've got quite a few.
Oh, perfect. Yep. Cool. So that's actually very, very common. And the reason for it is because during exercise, blood flow is redirected away from the gut to your working muscles. And that will suppress your hunger signals. As well, we have a hormone called ghrelin, which regulates our appetite. And ghrelin is reduced during and after running. And that can last anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes post-run. With that being said, even though you probably don't feel like eating, it's still important, obviously, for your recovery. So by actually eating something, it will help to stabilize that hormone and bring back your appetite. So if you don't feel like having a proper meal, some things that you can do are things like liquids, like chocolate milk or a protein smoothie, and then follow up with a balanced meal later on. So here are just a bit of some meal ideas for you, whether you're recovering with breakfast, lunch, or dinner, but it definitely can be anything as long as you quite follow that checklist with think of carbs, protein, color, and fluids, and you should be good to go. Okay, so this is just putting it all together in a few examples. So if you run in the early morning, you're likely won't have an opportunity to eat 2 to 3 hours before your run because you're sleeping. And I wouldn't sacrifice sleep to get up and eat before you run. So what you want to do is make sure that you're having a nice carb-rich meal the night before, and before you head off, have some simple carbs like some dates, for example. And then when you get home from your run, you might not have a lot of time before you head off for work, for example, so you might have something like a protein smoothie, a piece of fruit, and a muesli bar on the way. If you train in the afternoon, a couple hours before, you might have a carb-rich lunch with a bit of protein and fat and fiber, like a chicken wrap and some fruit, for example. And then when you get home, you can have your carb-rich snack, so like some white toast and jam, and then head off for your run. And then a post-run meal would be like a nice balanced dinner, like a beef burrito bowl, for example, and then a sweet treat for dessert always. Okay, so You've nailed everything that we've just discussed, and now you're looking for that little extra boost on race day. So always remember that supplements are just those extra, 1 to 2%. But if you do want a bit of an edge, if you're doing a half marathon or marathons, here are some things that you can potentially add into your routine. So firstly, we have caffeine. And so caffeine helps reduce perceived effort and pain during your run. So that can help you push harder for longer and improve your overall performance. To use it effectively, we want to aim for around 3 milligrams per kilo of body weight about 60 minutes before the race. And you can top up with some caffeine gels about 3/4 of the way through as well. But like anything, we want to practice using caffeine during training to figure out the right amount for you and how you respond. It's also a good idea to choose caffeine sources that have known caffeine amounts, such as like no-dose tablets, because if you rely on a shot of coffee, the caffeine content can vary significantly between different brands and different coffee shops, for example. So it's harder to gauge how much you're actually getting. And on race day, we want to keep everything as like tightly controlled as possible. Next, we have beetroot juice. So beetroot juice contains a high concentration of nitrates, which convert to nitric oxide in the body. So they help improve blood flow and oxygen delivery to the muscles, in turn enhancing your endurance. So it might be one that a lot of people don't know about. So now you're all in on a little secret. And you can buy concentrated little beetroot shots that are around 70 mils, and you want to have one of those around 2 to 3 hours before your race. Lastly, we'll just touch on carb loading. So think of it like fueling your car before a long road trip. And we want to do this before a half or full marathon and longer endurance events. So you want to aim for around 8 to 12 grams of carbohydrates per kilo of body weight for 1 to 2 days before the race. And that is a lot more than just a plate of pasta. And it does take a bit of planning to make sure that you're getting that amount in. But if it's done correctly, it will set you up for a really strong performance and race. Okay, so just key takeaways from my part of the presentation. So obviously, number one, meeting your energy demands is key to feeling and performing your best. Number two, carbs are king, so fuel up to sustain energy and maximize your performance. Number three, prioritize balanced meals with protein, carbs, and fat away from your main training sessions. Then prioritize your pre, intra, and post-run fueling strategy for optimal performance and recovery. And lastly, practice, practice, practice. So training your gut and practice during training to find what works best for you. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll have time for questions at the end.
Yes, we definitely will. We'll make sure we've got some time. So if there's questions, and even if we don't get to all your questions at the end, we will we'll have, so you've entered your email, we will email you with some answers, because we're really happy to obviously help provide you with some answers to your questions as part of this webinar. Thank you very much, Julia. That was excellent insights. Definitely taking notes, as I've clearly made some mistakes along the way with particularly the recovery stuff. So yeah, great insights into better fueling your body before and after running. So now we're getting Sean involved in chatting to us, and he is going to talk about something which I guess a lot of runners probably don't do a lot of, which is spending time in the gym. A lot of us get out and run. It's what we love to do. But there's more and more evidence suggesting that strength training for running not only can increase or reduce your injury risk, which is a good thing. The more time you spend running, the better. But it also can improve your performance. So Sean's going to get stuck in talking a bit about that. Oops, I'll just head back. I'll just give you control, Sean. And he's going to hopefully give you some insights in how to go about it and how getting some strength metrics can make some really, really good decisions and make it a lot easier for you.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Folks, I'm absolutely delighted to be talking to you this evening. Injuries and performance when it comes to running is something I'm really passionate about. So to talk to fellow runners is really, really great. Look, we're going to cover injuries and performance, and we're going to look at, well, okay, if I get injured or if I can perform better, well, how can I perform at my best? Key thing I think we need to start with is, well, why do we get injured? Okay, I'm going to bring your attention down just to the bottom right-hand side of the screen here. Okay, so 80% of running-related injuries are from mismanaged loading or overloading. So the vast majority of injuries are not trauma based. They're, okay, I've done too much too fast too soon. And I'm going to bring your attention now just to the left-hand side of the screen so you can explore that more. So we've got capacity on the right here and load on the left, balancing on this pyramid. And I want you to think of that as a set of scales. And here it's lovely and balanced. Great. Our load is, well, how much force do we put through our muscles, bones, joints, tendons? So for me today, for example, my load is pretty low. Walk to the train station to get to work, walk from the train station to work, and about 6,000 steps in work. Pretty low load. Haven't got any pain as a result because my capacity is higher than that. Well and good. What makes up my capacity? I've touched on some things in this pyramid here. You could fill this with 100 different things, but here are some of the main things that we would look at. Strength, endurance, motor control, or how efficiently we move, rate of force development, or how quickly we move, and our flexibility. And what happens is when we get injured is we have a mismatch in these. Oh, can you give me control there again, Andrew? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, should be good.
Great, thanks. All right. So when we get injured, we've got a mismatch. So if we look on the left, we're in this red zone, we're in this injury zone where our load exceeds our capacity. So that might be I'm running 30 kilometers a week, where actually I don't have the strength or endurance to tolerate that, and things start to get sore. The ideal scenario really is on the right, where my capacity exceeds my load. I'm starting to increase my mileage, let's say for a half marathon. I'm now up at 30 kilometers a week. My capacity is above that. I'm tolerating it really well. That's the ideal. If I go back a touch, I've mentioned some common injuries here on the right-hand side, and you might recognize some of these. So Achilles tendinopathy, runner's knee, IT band pain, the list goes on there, hip impingement, shin splints, calf strains, tib post tendinopathies. If you've had these in the past, let us know. Drop it in the chat box. We'd love to hear what you've been dealing with, and it gives us an idea of what's common so we can tailor the chat as we go. Also, if you haven't had any of these injuries, let us know. Same thing, drop it in the chat box. We see lots of different injuries and ones that are different to that, but they're definitely some of the common ones. So we started to explore, okay, well, why do we get injured? And we know it's that mismanagement of loading. Well, what increases the risk of injury? We know that two key factors, age and previous injury, strongly correlate with the risk of future injury. Now, we can't change those things. We're getting older, we're going into tomorrow. We can't change our age, but we can change what happens as we age. As we age, we tend to lose muscle mass. So keeping ourselves strong is going to be really important. And we're going to talk specifically around some strength metrics as we go. Previous injury, again, we can't change that, but we can change what happens after we get injured. For example, I've had 2 knee surgeries on my right-hand side. I know that quadricep strength from my running is going to be really, really important. Again, we're going to come on to specific metrics, but if you've suffered lots of calf injuries in the past, well, okay, you might have some calf deficits in terms of endurance and strength, and that's something you're going to want to have to look at. We know as well, decreased muscle tendon strength is a risk factor for developing injury. And again, we're going to talk specifics in terms of, well, how strong do I actually need to be? Okay, so the question is, how do I reduce my injury risk and how do I boost my performance? For those of you that are there and saying, look, well, that's all well and good, but I'm not injured. I just want to get better and quicker at running. Bear with me. We're going to come on to it. But first, how do I reduce my injury risk? As Andrew mentioned there, we're going to talk about strength training. Now, I'm sure everyone has heard before, strength training is really important. I know I should go to the gym for my running, but do I do a general plan? Do I have to be specific? What's the best way to do it? There's a couple of really key points. We know that to have sufficient strength gains, we want to do 2 to 3 times a week. 1 isn't quite enough. And we want to have unilateral or split stance inclusions. Now, what I mean by that is I could go to the gym and I could do double leg squats, double leg bridges, double leg RDLs, and that's brilliant. That's fantastic. But if I have a little bit of an asymmetry or I prefer moving on to my left leg, well, my right leg is starting to lose out now. But if I can include some lunge work, if I can include some single leg calf raises, I take that out of the equation and I keep both legs really strong. The key question I would want you to ask yourself is, well, what do I need? We know that there's all these fantastic general plans online on Instagram. That's fantastic. But what do you need yourself? Have you a history of calf strains? Do you feel your calves are constantly tight? Are you getting hip pain? Well, you probably need something locally around that muscle or tendon group. So how strong do you need to be? It's all well and good me saying, well, you should get strong, but how strong? It's different for everyone. I'm going to be diplomatic. I'm going to sound a bit like a politician here, but again, what do you want to achieve? If you're somebody who wants to run 2 5Ks a week, well, you probably don't need to be as strong, and you don't need to be as strong or have as much endurance as somebody who's wanting to run 60, 70K a week. I'm going to draw your attention here to the second point. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about this before. How many single leg heel raises or calf raises can I do to failure? And in the past, we would have said, look, if you can do 25, it's pretty good. We know that's not good enough now. We know we need to be more specific and add some things to our battery of tests. Absolutely. Will we look at your endurance if we see you in clinic? Yeah, we will. And if you're running 5Ks a week, 25 heel raises to failure, it's pretty good. But if you're looking to run 70 kilometers a week, we probably want that towards 40. And the key thing there is, look, I'm going to do a single leg heel raise, different to how Andrew will do it, different to how Julia will do it. We might have different heights, different speeds, different tempos, different movement strategies. So we want to standardize it. So from there on that point, if we bring you down to the right-hand side again, we know that for distance runners, the literature would suggest, and it's a lot, that as a minimum, you should be able to produce 1.6 times your body weight of force as you do a seated heel raise, as shown in the photo here. Now, we test that specifically in clinic on a frame exactly like this. We do our testing setup a little bit differently where the heel is lower, but that's just semantics. And we know that 1.6 times body weight of force going through our calf and being able to produce that is a really good predictor of reducing injury risk as a minimum. So it's a lot of force. But if we're taking, thousands of steps in our run, it's a significant amount of force to that calf, and we want to be strong. So, yep, will we look at your heel raise to failure? Yep. Is that a standalone measure good enough? No. We want to be really good peak force as well. On to the third point. The question I would ask is, well and good, maybe you're strong, maybe you've got good endurance. Are you strong through your full available range of motion? And are you strong at varying speeds? So when I'm running, I'm not going to stay a steady pace the whole time. I'm going to have tempo sessions in my running plan. I'm going to have slow, steady runs. And can my calf, for example, and when we're talking about calf here, can my calf deal with that? We're going to talk about that now in a second. Key point at the bottom, strength is really important. It's not the be all and end all. Let's not forget reactive strength. So how springy we are, our endurance, our single leg heel raises to failure, and our movement quality. And again, not the purpose of the talk today, but something we definitely look at in clinic. Now, I'm going to show you some videos here. If you know me, you know my calves need a lot of work, so this is good for me. But we talked about being strong through range at varying speeds. If we look on the far left here, I'm moving really slowly through a large degree of movement. And if you're new to running, this is probably a fantastic strategy for you to use. It's a little bit lower load. I have a weight in my hand. You might not even need that. In the center here, what we have is me doing a little bit more of an advanced calf strengthening exercise. I've loaded up a barbell on my back. I've got 40 kilo on there, and I would run through 3 rounds, 5 to 6 reps. If you're a more experienced runner, we'd want your body weight on that bar. And lastly, starting to move at speed. So getting some hopping, getting reactive strength in there. And with this, I'm starting to build a really robust calf. I can move through my full range. I can do it with good weight, and I can do it fast. Now, this is not a prescription. If you have calf pain or you have an injury at the minute, I wouldn't recommend jumping straight into this blindly. Consult with your physiotherapist, with your podiatrist, whoever's looking after your injury. That might be us. And get a good plan in place. We don't want to push you further into injury. It has to be specific and individualized. That's all well and good around the calf. I'm sure there's a lot of people on this talk that have or have had runner's knee or pain around their kneecap. We know that quadriceps weakness is found to be a risk factor in the development of runner's knee. Again, we talked about having a minimum of 1.6 times body weight capability to push through our calf. What about our quads? If we test you in clinic, we aim for 80% of body weight. We know that's a good metric to reduce injury risk. How we test that in clinic is we would set you up, strap around the ankle, we put something called a tension link to the other side of the bed, and we ask you to try and push out, and that measures your strength. We know improving strength levels reduces the risk of developing patellofemoral pain or runner's knee. But again, let's not forget endurance, movement quality, reactive strength, definitely something we would look at there as well. Okay, I'm going to leave that there for a second so you can see that. and we'll move on. Okay, so I've talked about strength training, and we're going to come back to that. It's very important. I'm sure a lot of people have heard that before, but the key thing is, can I be really specific on my metrics? Can I be training unilaterally? And can I train plyometrically? Can I be reactive off the ground? The other thing is load management, and I'm sure we've all heard it again before. A common mistake is too much, too soon, too fast. And I think we're all guilty of it. We start a new running plan. We think this is fantastic. Can't wait to smash my goals. And 3 weeks later, we're starting to develop some Achilles pain or knee pain or hip pain. Unfortunately, we see a lot of bone stress injuries and bone stress fractures in clinic. They're a common occurrence. And so what I would say is that every 4 to 6 weeks in your running plan, having what we would term as a bone holiday, and I've stolen that term off a physio called Aidan O'Flaherty, but I'll give him the credit. A bone holiday every 4 to 6 weeks would look like, if my 4th or 5th week is a 50-kilometer week, my next week would drop to a 25 to 30-kilometer week. So I'm getting two things when that happens. One, I'm getting a bit of a rest, which is fantastic. I'm going to improve my energy levels, all those things. But two, when I come back, my bone is now getting a new stimulus. It's going to adapt better, and it's going to reduce my injury risk or reduce the likelihood of me picking up a bone stress injury. So if you're on a 16-week marathon block, for example, you'd want to have 4 deloads, 3 to 4 deload weeks in there just to keep things ticking nicely. Again, third point there, listen to your body. What do you feel you need? Do you feel if you're on a 16-week training block, you need 4 deloads? Do you feel really good and you need 3? What's your previous injury history? It has to be specific. It's all well and good having panaceas and one size fits all, but we know that it should be individualized. So if you've had bone stress injuries in the past, you've had recurrent shin splints, you probably need more bone holidays. That won't decrease your performance. It'll actually help.
I've heard, Sean, that runners, someone suggested we call them adaptation weeks rather than deload weeks. It helps runners actually do them. I feel like there's actually something positive rather than negative that they're not running as much.
That sounds better. I'm going to use that from now on. That's a little bit more digestible, even for myself. Good. Thanks for that. Alrighty. Now, that's great. You might be sitting there and say, Sean, that's well and good, but I'm not injured. How do I get faster? How do I get better at running? Does strength and strength training play a role? It absolutely does. One of the factors that predicts running performance is running economy. I'm sure most of us have heard that term before. And in simple terms, that's the amount of oxygen our bodies use when we run at a given intensity or speed. And we know that better running economy equals a better ability to maintain and increase our pace, get faster. Great. There was a large-scale study done showing that, look, strength and plyometric training 2 to 3 times a week for 8 to 12 weeks had a significant large effect at improving running economy, thus improving performance. Now, if you're new to running and new to strength training, then twice a week strength training for 8 weeks is probably, and it will be good enough to improve your running economy. If you're more of an experienced runner and you're used to the gym, we're going to have to push that a little bit harder. That's when we'd recommend 3 times a week up to 12 weeks. And that's when you're going to get your adaptation. Twice a week for 8 weeks might not be enough if you're a bit more experienced. Okay. Now, when it comes to performance and improving performance, what kind of exercises should I do? Again, this is not a prescription. So if you're in pain, if you've had some injuries, I'm not saying that you should do this. Hopefully this loads up in a second for us, but I'll talk through them as it starts to go. They're going to get...
I can't see the screen. Hang on.
Oh.
Hang on. I think the screen just paused. Hang on a sec. Can you see the screen, Sean?
Yep.
Oh, it's paused on my end. That's all right. There we go. All good.
There we go. All right. Fantastic. So if we look on the far left, this might be an intro level exercise, goblet squat into double leg RDL. We talked about double leg versus single leg. Double leg still great, and this might be an intro level to get quads and hamstrings and glutes a little bit stronger. We do, however, want to transfer over into single leg or split stance. So a weighted Bulgarian split squat is going to be maybe a better idea then when we start to get a little bit more advanced. So we're getting strong, we're moving through large degrees of movement, or through range as we call it, but we also want to vary our speed and include plyometric training. So seated box jumps are going to be fantastic. It's really high effort. It's going to be really explosive, and it's quite quick. So then we're starting to tick off all our metrics again. We're getting strong, through range at varying speeds. And this would be a perfect example of something you could do to improve running economy. Again, not a prescription. If you're feeling injured or you have pain, consult with your physio or podiatrist and get a really good individualized plan. Now, I think a key thing is we've termed this the resilient runner, and I love the term resilience. I love the term robustness when it comes to rehab and performance. I think we can spend lots of time focusing on preventing injuries and reducing injury risk, and I think we can never fully prevent injuries. We know that that's part of life. We can reduce the risk, but I like to shift focus into, well, actually, instead of focusing on should I reduce the injury risk, can I get really robust? If you look at that in a dictionary, it's the quality or condition of being strong and in good condition, or the ability to withstand or overcome adverse conditions or rigorous testing. In the sports medicine world or in the sporting world, for me, it's the ability to train or compete at the level I want to repeatedly and successfully. How do I get robust? The metrics. Can I be really good strength levels? Do I have 1.6 times body weight force going through my calf? Can I produce that? Can I produce 80% body weight through my quad? Can I be consistent with my strength training blocks 2 to 3 times a week over 8 to 12 weeks? And once you're starting to tick those off, you're going to get really robust. And that's for me, a lot better way of framing it rather than can I prevent injury? And I think it's as you said there, Andrew. It's more positive. It's adaptation week and it's robustness rather than deload week and injury prevention. So
yeah, and I think also, Sean, it's being able to simply we focus on not being injured as a negative thing of being injured, but if you're able to back up sessions week after week, month after month, without injury interrupting, your performance is going to be significantly improved just for the fact that you're going to be consistent with your training.
Absolutely. And I think, and I'm sure you might find the same, is that, speaking to runners every week, I feel like we have conversations where I always feel tight. I always feel like I'm struggling to get through the week. Whereas actually that doesn't have to be the case. Does it require a bit of hard work? Absolutely. But it's very achievable. And once we start to get specific with it and specific with the numbers, and look, are the numbers everything? No, we know that we want all those other things, our movement quality, our endurance, but the numbers they do play a role, and getting to this state is definitely achievable. Don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
100%. I think it just helps take some of the guesswork out of it, which I think in the past, if running's the main thing that you want to be doing, and certainly it is for me, I'll jump in the gym if it's going to improve my performance and reduce my risk of injury. But I want to make sure that time is well spent. I don't want to be taking time out of running if it's kind of a little bit unnecessary and it's not going to give me that bang for buck. So I think this can kind of cut through that and reduce some of the guesswork. It can also be like, hey, you're really strong in this area. Let's not focus on that area. Let's focus on the areas that you are weak and get those areas stronger.
Yeah, I think that's great, and completely resonate with you want to, when you like running, and we all like running on this panel, is that I don't want to spend too much time in the gym that's taken away from my running. So you can be really smart with your training and superset. Prime example is this on the left. I'm doing 2 exercises in one. I'm not wasting time, and I've already 3 major muscle groups ticked off. So very achievable to be smart with our time in the gym as well. Last little bits from me. Look, if you're struggling with injury and you might have been, having recurrent injuries, and you might have tried some plans in the past, and if you feel it's not getting you to where you want to be, I would ask the case, is it individualized and specific enough? And reflecting on that can be helpful. As have I done a lot of double leg? Do I need to be doing single leg? What are the considerations there? And it might be the case you need an individualized specific plan. Then you can work through the stages of recovery efficiently with clarity. Those stages roughly look like these 4 things, where you initially protect or you calm the injury down, you rebuild your strength, endurance, movement quality, efficiency, whatever that is. You return to the level you want to be and make sure you're performing at that. And then we get robust. Then we think about, okay, well, how can I compete at the level I want to repeatedly, successfully, and progress to the times, paces, distances I want to be able to do. Last bit, in a nutshell, 3 takeaways. And if you take this away, you're doing great. Strength train 2 to 3 times a week. Include unilateral or split stance training. So that might be a lunge, Bulgarian split squat, those type things. Include your plyometrics, which is your hopping, jumping, landing work. bone holidays are key. I'm going to say adapt every 4 to 6 weeks for 1 week, get your adaptation in. So that might be a little drop in mileage just to get that rejuvenation, and then we push on. And then when it comes to changing our framework from injury prevention to robustness and resilience, where am I in relation to the literature? How strong actually am I? Maybe I can do 25 calf raises, but what are the height of those? What are the speed of those? Is that very specific? I'd argue not. Can I push 1.6 to 2 times body weight for my calf? Yeah, we're on the right track. Folks, thanks for listening to me on this Thursday night. Feel free to pop in questions. As Andrew said, if we don't get to you, we will get to you. We will send you an email in the next week. We love talking about running, so please do send in questions. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So big thank you to Julia and Sean. Hopefully there's some things that will slightly change perhaps your perceptions on nutrition. Sometimes I think there's a lot of information out there in all of these areas, and particularly with running. And what we want to try and do is just cut through some of that and give you some key things that we know make a difference. As Sean said, we're all passionate runners. We love everything there is about running. So if you've got questions, we've got kind of probably 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes of questions. If you want to chuck them in the chat box, there is a Q&A. If you want to chuck them in the chat, actually just pop them in the questions is fine. I'll see if I can actually, some people are saying it's disabled. So I'll see if, here we go. Just put them in the Q&A part of it, I think will be fine. I'll just check if that's working. So if you've got any questions, just start popping them in. I've got one question here from Aidan, Julia. On water intake, is there any guidance on the amount of water to drink for runs, sort of 1 to 3 hours?
Not particularly. There's no set guideline. Again, it's very individual. Things like, weather, hotter conditions, how fast you're running and things like that. But the general rule is to drink to thirst, which is kind of not helpful. But if you're thirsty and you feel like it, then definitely take that fluid on board and make sure that you go into the run well hydrated to begin with as well.
Yeah, got a question here for you, Sean. How do you know what your capacity is so you stay ahead of your possible load?
Yeah, so I think breaking capacity into separate sections is key. And as I said, you could fill 100 things that make up your capacity, but three key things I would say for me is your strength, your endurance, and the other thing is flexibility to a degree, but that would be the third most important thing there. And I would imagine that most people here are flexible enough to run. That's rarely a key consideration. In terms of strength, it depends on the muscle group. So again, if it's calf, we're looking 1.6 times body weight on our seated heel raise. There are other metrics we'd look at, but the purpose of this, that's the key one. It's knee, 80% body weight. And then the other key thing then is around the hip, but we can come on to that. The difficulty is if you don't have access to the valve, then I would say you're looking around your gym work. So to answer that, if you can get to pushing your body weight on the bar for 3 rounds of 6 repetitions, that's a good metric. Similarly, if you can get onto a single leg press and be able to push 1.5 times your body weight, then that's a good metric. Again, I'd be looking to do that for reps, 3 rounds, 6 reps. That's not as specific as the valve testing, but you're in the right ballpark with that. That's hard, and not many people are there, but I think we chronically are not strong enough to do the mileage we want usually, and that's definitely what we see. So just as a recap to that, calf, if it's in the gym, body weight on bar, 3 rounds, 6 reps for quad / a little bit of hip, single leg press, 1.5 times body weight. What I would say is, as a caveat, don't just jump to that to test it, build it up slowly. But that's what I'd be looking at there.
Yeah, I think to your point, Sean, I think it's I'm often amazed how quite serious runners aren't as strong as they should be. And it's often one of the things that we sort of see when we're testing is that, yeah, they might be doing 100 plus Ks a week, but the reason why they keep getting injured is just their calf strength is not naturally getting stronger through their running. So that's why adding this in on top of, because I think a lot of us think if I just run, I'll be fine. This is saying, look, particularly as we get older, putting some strength training into our running program is really, really important. I've got a question that I can answer. Was any ideas in preventing blisters in the arch of the foot during long distances? Blisters are one of the most challenging things I see, actually, because they're multifactorial in how they start. The simple thing is trying to address the cause. Blisters are caused by friction and movement within the shoe generally. So it can be movement within the shoe. It can be actually movement on the bone within the foot, sort of trapping the skin and moving against the surface of the shoe. The main thing we want to try and do is address what the cause is. But the simple things that you can do is to prevent the things that are likely to cause a blister to occur during a long run. So if they don't happen on your short runs, but they happen on your long runs, using appropriate socks, so socks that wick the sweat away. If your feet stay wet or they get wet during a run, you're much more likely to get a blister. We recommend the Steigen socks. They sort of have a blister guarantee because they are a very low frictionless sock. And making sure you check that there's not excessive movement of your foot within the shoe. There are blister patches and things which can be very useful, but most of the time it's about prevention of blisters rather than treating them once they occur. We've got a question, Sean, do we have any data regarding injuries in perimenopausal women? I used to be fairly injury-free, but now my number of injuries and general pain has increased in perimenopause.
Yeah, there is data. It's definitely emerging in the last couple of years. There's not as much data on it as I would like. But two key things there is that we know perimenopausal is that there's an increased incidence of tendon-related injuries. And there's a number of different factors to that. So the key thing there is if you're starting to pick up tendon injuries, Achilles, those sorts of things, is we know we can't change the aging process or those sorts of things, but we can change how well our Achilles functions. So it's likely that you might have to work a little bit harder to get that Achilles stronger. There are also medical input that you can have as well, and that's something that's on a case-by-case basis with medication and those sorts of things. So oftentimes when I see patients that are perimenopausal or postmenopausal and they're starting to suffer tendon pains, physio is definitely an option, but a lot of the time I'd work closely with a sports doc as well, just to help manage if there's any hormonal considerations to have there. The other thing is that we know that when we're coming into that age bracket is that we start to get a reduction in bone density. So again, bone stress injuries can start to spike at that as well. So we know that we talked a lot about muscle and tendon and getting stronger there. We know that we can adapt bone to be stronger as well. So strength training will help that, but also plyometric training. Again, case-by-case basis, but there is evidence to suggest that higher incidence in tendon injuries are picked up.
Just a quick one, and we had a few people just wanting clarification around what you mean by body weight on the bar.
Yeah, sorry. So body weight on the bar, I'm a 85 kilo male, 85 kilo on the bar. So if the bar is 20, I'm sticking another 65 on that.
Yeah. Got one for you, Julia. About nutrition from Sam, about nutrition for, say, a half marathon. I'm running one in roughly 75 minutes. Do I take carbs on right from the start, or do I wait till the half an hour mark before taking them on? I've never fueled for races before, as I've only ran one half marathon before.
Okay, well, first of all, good on you for not having any fuel at all and completing a half marathon. It's pretty impressive. Yes, I would say have what I talked about, the pre-training timeline. Definitely optimize a really good carb breakfast before you do go for your half marathon, and then having those pre-training carbs right before, and then every 25 to 30 minutes taking on a carbs, whether it's a gel or whatever you're choosing. So yeah, definitely don't wait until the hour mark, have it before, because once you hit the wall, you can't backtrack it. So you want to get into it earlier.
This is a good one for people who do evening runs. From Sean, what about advice regarding fueling before and after evening runs, being that going to sleep is usually close after the run?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's very dependent on the person and how close you're going to bed and what sort of time frame you have after you finish. But whether you're going to bed really, really quickly after you get back, I would still prioritize what I said in terms of post-training, post-run recovery. Doesn't have to be as much as a typical meal, but whatever you can sort of get in and what feels comfortable for you, and making sure that there's carbs and protein in it before you go to bed.
This is a good question from Josh, actually. It's one that I have heard conflicting information around, Sean. It's fitting strength training in around running. Sort of, do you train on your run days? Would you strength train in the morning followed by an easy run later in the day? How do you say if you're running 4 times a week, where do you fit your strength training in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Before I answer that, I'm just going to clarify the body weight on the bar. Please use a Smith machine. Don't use a free bar. I've seen people try to do that before. It's a disaster. Smith machine, please.
Smith machine's a fixed bar. For those who don't know, it's like a squat rack, but it's fixed to the machine, so it only slides up and down. You can't fall back with it.
Yes, but to answer your question, Josh, it's a great question. What I tend to do is if we're strength training 3 times a week and we're also running, say, 3 times a week, 2 factors to consider. One is that I would split my strength days into a high, moderate, and low effort day. And then what I would say is, okay, as a rule, if you're going to run and strength train on the same day, run first. We know that if we're strength training beforehand, we can get muscular fatigue, but also fatigue through our central nervous system. And then our run just becomes way less effective and way less adaptive. So what I would say is if you're going to run on your strength day, run first, then strength train. And ideally, what I tend to do is if I'm planning out people's weeks and we're starting to do, maybe some runs on strength days, they're your moderate or low effort strength days that are paired with the run. So I'm trying to keep my high effort strength day as a standalone, free with no run in that day. But if I'm going to be running and strength training on the same day, which is a perfect thing to do, there's no problem with it. As a rule, run first, then strength train.
What do you say to those runners who say that it decreases their sort of feeling during a run or performance during a run? They feel heavy and sluggish. I think that's often a thing that I get from runners, and that often is off-putting, and often they lose the motivation to keep the strength training because they feel like it decreases their running efforts and energy levels.
Absolutely. It's a really key factor. I think there's 2 factors to put in there, and the answer is, one, I think a lot of what Julia spoke about is really helpful, and I definitely learned a lot from it, and that's going to help me with planning around my week. But a lot of it is we're going to be a little bit sore after strength training, especially if it's new. But being really smart about our high, medium, and low programming days is going to be really, really key. So if you know that you're going to have to do like a high intensity, let's say tempo run that you don't have time to warm up for, then I'm definitely pairing that with a low effort strength day. Whereas if I know I've got a steady state run to do 10 to 15 kilometers, it's going to be pretty easy for me. I'm happy to pair that with my higher load or higher effort day. And I'm going to accept that for the first 2 kilometers, I might be a little bit stiffer and sore. A question that I get asked a lot is, well, what's the best warm up to do? And there is no best warm up. There's no magic bullet. What I would say that is, as a rule, I tend to say for your slow, steady runs, that running is the best warm up. Quite frankly, if you're coming into your tempo session, I would do running drills. So I would do A skips, B skips, and some hopping. That doesn't have to be specific, and they're really easy to find on YouTube. A skip, B skip, and they're just going to get you into that pattern and free you up. There's no one magic bullet of mobility or stretch that I would suggest. I think we can spend our time better doing those things.
Yeah, and I think from my personal experience, it does improve. So you will find early on when you're introducing running training or strength training into your running training, you will feel a bit slow and sluggish to start, but it does reduce, and you will actually be able to notice you can go further and faster. So there's probably a good sort of 2 or 3 weeks at least while you adapt, but once the adaptation occurs, you will actually find that you can back up the sessions.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Julia, on what are your thoughts on collagen for running recovery?
In terms of injury, I might email them and get a bit more information about what they're talking about.
Done.
Yeah.
You can do that, because I think giving us nice specific. Just in terms of recovery, it's probably something that we can talk more about. From a cool down, you mentioned a warm up. Anything specific? Someone sort of mentioned hot, cold water therapies. Anything that you suggest to help people recover from either the sort of the strength or the running?
Sleep and eat. Sleep and eat. Again, I think we can spend lots of time stretching, foam rolling, massage gunning, and if that works for you, fantastic. I know myself, I run a couple of times a week, strength train a couple of times a week. I really like stretching. I do a 5-minute mobility routine that's not specific, and I really like that. But there's no evidence to suggest that'll help me recover better than a walk. It's just what I like to do, and I feel better after it. Priorities: sleep and eat.
But it's probably a really good point that probably a lot of us, and I know I'll put my hand up, I don't eat anywhere near enough, and I don't eat it at the right time. So that's probably something that we can all, I think, take away from Julia's talk, is that the actual part of our recovery, the nutrition side of things, is actually much more important than we perhaps give it credit for. So Marnie's asked, talking about sort of specifics around the best shoes for different types of runs. Certainly, as a sports pod, we have that question a lot, and I'm a big advocate for trialing lots of different shoes. We're talking about building capacity. Sean spoke a lot about that as part of runners, and I think we want to be as resilient and robust as we possibly can. So often wearing the one pair of shoes for all of your runs isn't necessarily the best thing. Now, there might be some instances where we might be saying, look, because of this particular injury, you need to be in this shoe for these reasons. But ideally, that'll only be for a short period of time. So we're big advocates for mixing up the type of footwear for different surfaces. If you're doing trail running, it's a different story. If you're doing track running, if you're doing tempo runs, yes, wearing a lighter weight trainer, there's some good, you can pull on the super shoes. We only recommend the super shoes for those sort of more interval, shorter tempo-based sessions. I wouldn't be doing a lot of your long runs in those. But mixing up is a really good way to change the stimulus and to build that capacity, because you're going to be running on different surfaces and race day, and building up that resilience is another way to help reduce your injuries, particularly from a foot perspective. Last question was from someone: is there any chance to access this recording? Yes, we are going to share the recording with you all. So we'll also share the slides. We've got an offer for those of you who'd like to experience the strength testing as well. We're going to the offer will be that you can have an hour consultation with us at the price of a half an hour consultation, so we can run through the battery of tests that we would do for runners. So if it's something that you'd like to do, we've got clinics around Melbourne, in Melbourne East, Blackburn, Essendon, and in St Kilda. So we'd love to work with you if this is something that you'd like to get the data on. Julia is based at our Essendon clinic, but also does appointments online via telehealth. So she's very available, very experienced, and I certainly would recommend all of you discuss nutrition. I think it's something that's really undervalued as a key important part of performance and managing, keeping you running and enjoying your running. I think that's really, really important. Running's supposed to be fun. It's something we all do to get out and break from the day-to-day, and we want to make sure that you enjoy it as much as you possibly can. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining on a Thursday night. We'll share this in the next coming days. For those of you who we haven't answered the questions, we will get to you. I realised the chat wasn't working to put the code word in, so we'll work out a way to do that. But big thank you to all of you for coming along, and we hope to see you in the clinic one day or out on the running track around Melbourne.